Robinson from Bristol, and we will talk about reaction-diffusion as active matter.
Okay, so I'm going to show that a particular class of reaction-diffusion systems reduce to field theories that are conventionally used to model active matter, describe active matter. The nice thing about reaction-diffusion is it's quite a lot simpler than your typical models in contemporary active matter, so we can understand in granular detail how anti-diffusion emerges. Okay, so way back when we started this, we were motivated by biological condensates. So inside the cell, we know that there are all these membraneless compartments, many of which form by some form of liquid-liquid phase separation. It's interesting. But the language used to describe it in biological literature is very much thermodynamic, about free energy, minimizing free energies, which must be incomplete. The reason being is, this particular study here, they're looking at transcriptional condensates, tagging proteins involved in these condensates related to gene expression. And they're looking at the lifetimes of condensates, many of which are transient, but a significant number are stable essentially for the lifetime of the cell, up until mitosis. If you have a picture of oil and water phase separation, this doesn't make a lot of sense because you'd expect them to grow to osmolar, right? So this is curious. So an alternative paradigm, it would be active matter. It's not the only mechanism proposed, but it's the one relevant to this workshop. Okay, now these condensates, they form very quickly, less than a second, so we expect, it's much more rapid than the time to synthesize new proteins, so we would expect conservation laws to be upheld at least approximately. Okay, so I'm going to focus on active matter with conserved order parameters. To date, focusing on scalar active matter, for simplicity, the most general field theory that's been proposed is active model B+. That's this guy up here. You have a conserved order parameter phi, and a current with three terms, a free energy minimizing term of Cahn-Hilliard form, augmented by these two non-integrable terms, coefficients lambda and zeta. The key thing about this model is in a portion of its phase space, you get this lovely microphase state. And in mean field, if you turn off the noise, that's this guy here, then you get a stable pattern, okay, far from equilibrium. On the right-hand side, we have reaction-diffusion. So I have a vector rho in some multi-dimensional vector, not vector space, chemical space, where each of the components you can imagine describing, say, a concentration of a particular chemical species, maybe a protein or whatever. And we have regular diffusion augmented by a term which models the reactions, which is the sources and sinks. And it's well known that you can get patterns out of this, stable patterns, stripes, dots, arguably a fish's eye. It's applied across all length scales in biology. It's sort of the zeroth order model for a lot of descriptions. So we have two classes of model which both predict stable patterns. It's natural to expect there to be a correspondence between these two. I'm going to try to forge that. I'm going to forge that today, but focusing on, I'm going to derive an effective free energy functional out of reaction diffusion, plus this lambda term. The zeta term is a lot more involved, so if there's time, I'll say some words about it, but it's I cannot fit it into a half an hour slot. Okay, so the field theories are used to provide coarse-grained descriptions of systems. So we're going to use coarse graining. The crux of my argument is I'm going to rely on the fact that spatial gradients are going to be small in the large-scale limit. I'm going to coarse-grained description. So to start with, I'm going to consider the homogeneous evolution. When you keep the system well mixed, you just have this R term. Okay, let me show an example. This is a two-component system, and I'm just showing the phase portraits. So these orange lines, I have a flux driving me towards some steady state. And the collection of states, of the homogeneous steady states, we're going to call the null line. There is no component of the flux in the direction of this green arrow. It's because I've imposed a conservation law. Okay. So that means that the phase portraits are always confined to the level sets of some order parameter phi, which is the contraction of my full high-dimensional chemical vector in the direction of this green arrow. Chemical space is not Euclidean, so you have to be careful about one forms and vectors. So my conserved direction is a one form. It's a detail. Okay. To make progress, I need to assume there's no limit cycles, so there's always a stable state, and there are no unstable regions in my null line, so at every value of phi, I can exactly map it on to a point along the null line. So it's a good order parameter. When you can do this, then I can write down the points along the null line as a contour integral, following some tangent vector. That's this blue arrow along my null line. Okay. I'm going to have a differential geometric framework to describe this curvilinear shape, which is a good reference state. Okay, now the derivation. Let me get the chalk. So this is the geometry, and the derivation follows very simply. Okay, so I'm going to introduce two projection operators. I'm going to project the full evolution equation onto a component in phi and an excess quantity. I'll go to the other board. So projecting onto phi, the flux vanishes. I can call this object mu. If I can find rho as a functional of phi, then I've solved it. I've got a field theory just in terms of phi. That's great, that's what we want. To find rho as a functional of phi, so a function of phi and its spatial derivatives, I need to project into the other space. So I define it. So I have my reference state along the null line, and I have this subspace of non-conserved modes. It's a bona fide subspace. The excess quantity is the amount I'm moving in the subspace. In 2 dimensions, it's just one component vector on the red arrow. And I get something that looks very similar to my evolution equation, but now I have this nasty nonlinear projection operator. It's almost solved. Okay. Now, at large length scales, reactions will dominate. And so these non-conserved modes, they're going to very rapidly decay back into the vicinity of the null line. This means that in the long time limit, these reactive modes are going to follow adiabatically phi. So in the informal argument, I can just set this to 0. You can formalize this, tighten up the argument, but this is good enough, it gives the right answer. If we're close to the null line, then I can expand linearly around this curvilinear geometry. So I have linear coefficients. These depend on where I am in the null line, so it's nonlinear in phi, but overall it's linear in rho. This gives me the solution. See, I'll move it up in a second. Is that visible?
Yes.
I'll move over here. Okay. That's the solution for these reactive modes to adiabatically follow phi. It's cute. All the effort was in setting up the geometry. Gives me this solution. I can expand this as a geometric series. And then I'm done. Again, because we're at large length scales, so gradients are small, so I can always expand. If I take this adiabatic solution, I insert it into here, I have an expression for the chemical potential, I have a field theory. It looks like this. Okay, so the leading term gives me an effective bulk free energy that just describes the shape of the null line. So I have an effective chemical potential that is just related to the shape of this null line. If the null plane is cubic with a characteristic turning point, that implies a quartic free energy, and you can use the language of phase separation. The reason of equilibrium phase separation. The reason that this works is because the null plane is the target of a homogeneous solution. That's what bulk free energy does. Then I have these interface corrections related to a contraction, described in terms of a contraction of one form and a vector. These vanish when you have infinitely fast reactions, so the effective interface terms that emerge are related to finite reaction speeds when you deviate from the null plane. It's cute. Okay, yeah, so I've got a V, my vector, this guy gives you an infinitesimal chemical flux, reaction flux, from there being an inhomogeneity in phi, and what alpha does is it from effective flux, it tells you what the response of rho is, rho excess, the non-conserved modes, and then it projects it back down to tell you the effect it has on the transport of phi.
Sorry, I missed something.
Yeah, please.
Why is the current still a gradient of some chemical potential? Where has that gone in here?
Where has it gone?
Yeah.
I just project the full evolution equation. I contract onto the conserved direction, and it has a form of Laplacian.
Yeah, but why? Why is it not a divergence of a current? Why
It is a divergence of current.
Sorry, I mean, why is the current not a gradient of a chemical potential?
It is.
Why is the current a gradient of a chemical potential? Why is it not? Why doesn't it have a curl? So why isn't there a zeta?
You need more. This is the basic solution. You need to break this solution to get a zeta term. You need non-local physics. I will say some words about one way to get that, but this does not give you a zeta term, and I spent a year and a half trying to figure out why. It's subtle, and it's not unique.
So that means that this does not give you bubbles or droplets?
It will give me droplets,
Because I thought,
but not patterns.
I thought the zeta term was needed.
It is needed, exactly. This will not give me a pattern. It won't give me stripes.
It will give you a pattern.
I want stripes, but I need a zeta term for that. You need one way to get it is to introduce multiple length scales. So what I've assumed that all my coefficients are the same order. Right? In this clearly for me to expand this operator, let me start an inverse. This has to be small. So I need to make this singular, a singular perturbation in order to break this solution and get patterns. But this is the starting point on which everything else, all the generalizations are built. I mean, are there any more questions at this point?
And could you get patterns if you went to a higher order there? I mean, you said plus order nabla to the sixth.
I don't think so. So what I did is I took, numerically I've tried and failed while assuming these are all order 1 and I've tried every permutation I could think of and not got patterns. And when I looked at the literature on reaction diffusion with conservation laws, like cell polarization models, every single model I could find that did give you patterns broke one or both of these assumptions. Normally this one. Make some components diffuse much more rapidly, so they vary on a different length scale.
That's not true.
No,
Well,
I would like to.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
You do need diffusion coefficients to be a little different. That's all you need.
To get phase separation, yes, but to get patterns, no. We can talk about that. You get coarsening unless you break it. I've read that you get coarsening, right?
No. You
No,
get
no,
spirals,
I
you
think
get
you-
whatnot, anything.
Okay.
Also, so you said making the LMSD singular?
Yeah.
Is how you would get the same return?
Not singular, but highly heterogeneous.
Okay. But
Well,
how do
the
you,
perturbation is singular.
but you still have in your phi equation, you still have a Laplacian outside, so that already in my construction is saying that the current is a gradient.
So the key thing is non-locality, right? You can have a chemical potential of this form, but if you make mu non-local, you can write that, you have freedom to turn it into a zeta term. So it's non-locality. Okay. So there's a cute geometric interpretation of in this approach of the lambda term, and you also have a square gradient term from kappa prime. These represent, I've got these two natural directions. Kappa prime relates to a change in the angle between them, and lambda is a torsion. So if I move in the conserved direction, like this, there's a rotation. It turns out this directly relates to circulation in function space of phi, it's dissipation. You can also interpret it as an emergent chemical pathway at an interface where the phase boundary itself catalyzes a new reaction. You can view it that way, which is nice. It's cute. Yeah, detail. Okay. Yeah, please.
The motion in the reactive subspace is a relaxation to chemical steady state and perpendicular to like phase equilibrium or something.
Could you repeat that? Could you start? Say again.
The motion in the reactive subspace, is this related to the relaxation to the chemical steady state, whereas the motion perpendicular something related to like the relaxation to the phase equilibrium? Is this what you're kind of outlining? It looks so for me. Like you have reactions, and then this move you in the reaction extent plane, and then you have like the diffusion basically that moves you like into the circle
Yes.
space. Is it kind of the right interpretation of the geometry you're showing?
I believe so.
Okay.
If I understand your question correctly, I think you're right. Yeah. If you're doing like asymptotic treatment, then the dominant balance would be the linear expansion of the flux and the diffusion of phi. It's messy to do it that way. Okay. So, putting aside Professor Frey's objections, I don't believe you'll get patterns this way. We can talk offline maybe. To get one way to get patterns is to introduce components that diffuse much more rapidly. So in this case, I have similar to the two-component system I showed at the beginning with quartic effective free energy. That means that they vary only over the interface. But I have a third component that couples with these two, where it's almost sinusoidal. It varies on a much longer length scale. It's a bit technical to get there. You need two generalizations of what I've presented, but in the end, you do get something which is like active model B plus, where I have these leading terms arise from a very similar argument as I just presented, but in terms of the components that vary over a short length scale, and you get a second free energy functional which captures the longer wavelength, the longer length scale variation. Okay, and you get a new non-integrable term which is analogous to lambda. In fact, all of these terms, zeta is analogous to kappa, geometrically has a very similar meaning, and eta has a very similar meaning to lambda. And in length scale separation, I believe, I may be wrong, is the key. But okay, I will stop there, and you can tell me I'm wrong. So I thank my collaborators, Thomas Speck, Stuttgart, Thomas Michon, Bristol, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. We have time for questions. What's the first one?
So what tells you that kappa is positive? Because if kappa is not positive, if the free energy itself has a switch Reinberg-like form, then you will get that even if it's
Yes. It seems to be the case. Again, this is numerical that when the spinodal condition is met, when you have instability, kappa is always positive. In my numerical treatments, I haven't been able to construct a counterexample. When you don't have spinodal decomposition, kappa can be negative. But then you don't have decomposition.
You have before you started with the sort of geometric reduction,
Yeah.
so you had an assumption on the null clients where you chose null clients only when they don't have an unstable region, so they will not be reagent.
Yes,
Yes.
excluded this.
Do you have a sense for what can one do in that case? Are there generalizations?
I wasted a year trying to, but the differential geometry doesn't work. It's pathological. It'd be really nice to do something. You get waves when you have reentrant regions. I direct you to Professor Frey and colleagues' work. But I can't. The differential geometry becomes. You might be able to do something very approximately, but it's pathological in the space. It's not good. Phi is not a good order parameter. You need to choose a different order parameter, and it wouldn't be conserved.
So is it just that it's not a one-dimensional reduction is not possible, or
I can do multidimensional, but with multiple conservation laws.
Yes.
I present it in the preprint. It's straightforward.
No, in the case of that, is it just that this 1D reduction is not possible, or that you don't have an entire reduction
need-
at all is not possible?
So you can't parameterize this part with phi,
Sure.
because phi increases and then it goes in the direction of the conservation law. They coincide, right? So you can't normalize them, binormalize.
Yeah.
So you just need to use a different order parameter.
We have another question. Brian?
Yeah, I think it's a comment on what you just said. If you have bistable regimes, then this one-to-one mapping, which one assumes by adiabatic elimination, is no longer working because you have two possibilities to choose from.
I agree.
And that's why you then have propagating modes.
Yes.
And you would need to really introduce a second variable to account for the switching between the two possible solutions that you have.
I agree, yes. The other issue is that you can't actually invert L because it diverges at that point, at the turning points. It's really pathological. Even if you choose a better reference state, a line like this, it just doesn't work.
There are two questions at the back I saw. Mike?
You didn't say anything about the noise terms.
Yeah, this is all mean field, or my background is liquid state theory, so I thought of it as dynamical density functional theory when I don't worry about noise. But yeah, in principle, you could write down a complicated noise term, but I have not even gone near it with the bidirectional. Just mean field.
There is another way, of course, to break detail balance, which is by mismatching the noise to the leading mobility term in the passive. And that just occurred to me that might come up here as well, potentially.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to explore that. But I was focused on the mean field case, it's already interesting.
There was another hand somewhere there.
So if the starting point reaction-diffusion dynamics is equilibrium, the gradient descent. If the starting point...
I'm hard of hearing, I want to come a bit closer, sorry.
If the starting point reaction-diffusion dynamics is an equilibrium dynamics.
No, it's far from equilibrium. So the diffusive... I haven't specified the microscopic model, so, but if you imagine it coming from, say, projection of the Smolov-Chomsky equation, then the diffusion term is the ideal gas term. So there's a natural, but then as soon as this deviates from being a linear function, then it's out of equilibrium. You have different reservoirs for the chemical flux and the diffusion.
Right.
So it's always far from equilibrium by the fact that R is nonlinear. The linear case is boring.
Okay, before we go into the break, I have a question myself. So there were a sequence of papers by Walter Zimmermann in the past years where he showed that I think for any system that has a large-scale monotonic instability and one conservation law, you can, by weakly nonlinear theory, essentially get the equations that you get. So can you comment on differences and similarities of the two approaches?
I don't know if I know the name. I may have read them, I may not, but
You cite them in the preprint.
I do.
Yeah.
Then yes, I do know them. Like Bergman.
Bergman, Zimmermann.
Yes, I do know the papers. Yeah, I just know we called it the Bergman. Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah. So very similar. So if you expand to one higher order in their root, you get consistency with the solution, not the zeta term, but just what I presented today. The nice thing that what this contributes is a more geometric understanding and a quicker way to get their answers. Right? They have to introduce lots of asymptotic scalings, which is more formally correct. It's just quite a long way. It obscures the geometry.
Okay, thank you. I think